Hello everyone. Welcome to my presentation on data injection attacks in randomized gossiping. This presentation is based on Reinhard Gentz et al. Their paper on data injection attacks in randomized gossiping, published in December of 2016. So basically this paper goes over gossiping algorithms and and data injection attacks, mostly internal injection attacks, um, infiltrating randomized gossiping. This is not a common form of attack, but this paper does go over different ways to mitigate these types of attacks, and we are going to talk a little bit more about that. So a quick overview about what we're going over in this presentation. I'm going to be going over nodes. In order to understand gossip algorithms, I'll have to go over nodes as well as clusters, and the way that nodes relate to clusters and the way that those two items relate to a gossip algorithm. Then after gossip algorithms, I'll be going in insider injection attacks, then methods that the paper recommends for detecting attacks, and then methods or strategies for mitigating these attacks, strategies such as time difference and spatial difference. Then I will go over the paper's performance analysis as well as a conclusion at the end of this presentation. So firstly, let's go over what a node is. A node is a point at which lines or pathway intersect or branch. A node is also a central or connecting point. Nodes must be part of a cluster with regards to technical aspects of nodes. And lastly, nodes cease to be nodes if they are no longer parts of a cluster. So in the next slide, we will discuss a little bit more about clusters. A cluster is a group of nodes and other resources that act like a single system. Clusters enable high availability, and they distribute information between nodes. So they are basically a place for nodes to communicate with each other, and we will talk a little bit more about that in the next slide when defining gossip. So what is gossip other than, serving up a hot dish? um, So with regards to, the technological aspect and programming aspect, gossip is a broadcast tool for disseminating data. No centralized server holds cluster information. Instead, peers spread information amongst themselves, maintaining only the latest information automatically. So gossip is an algorithm in which the nodes can communicate with each other and spread this information on their own. This is a very efficient algorithm because the nodes can reorganize themselves automatically, and it is an advantage due to a built-in fault tolerance to node failures, so they can effectively communicate with each other without failure. As I mentioned, the gossip algorithm, in the gossip algorithm, nodes share information with other nodes, aka gossip with other nodes, until every cluster knows the information. So again, this is a very efficient way, a very efficient algorithm. However, in the case of insider attack gossip-based algorithms, they are highly vulnerable. So even if one node is compromised, all of the nodes can be compromised with the way that they efficiently share the information with each other. So these algorithms can in turn become a liability. Their efficiency can become a liability, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the injection attack section. This is a great quote from the Data Injection Attacks in Randomized Gossiping paper by Reinhard Gens et al. I went over this a little bit in the last slide, but the key advantage of gossip-based algorithms is the built-in fault tolerance to node failures, as nodes can recognize themselves automatically. Gens et al. Data Injection Attacks in Randomized Gossiping. So that just kind of reiterates the convenience of gossip algorithms. All right, so one thing that Gens really wanted to talk about in this paper is insider injection attacks with regard to gossip algorithms. So an insider injection attack, within that, authentication and encryption can be used to prevent interference from unauthorized nodes. That's one way to protect a gossip-based algorithm. However, insider attacks happen with authentication and encryption have failed. And so these things can fail with an insider attack, and then gossip-based algorithms are highly vulnerable to insider attacks. So for example, if one node is compromised, the gossip architecture compromises the entire algorithm. Um, so there is a figure here before an attack and after an attack. The C figure here is completely detached from the cluster of nodes, and that can highly compromise the algorithm altogether. And what this paper sought to research are different mitigation factors and methods of detecting injection attacks. So in order to detect these injection attacks, first the paper went over 3 detection tasks. And we can go ahead and go over those here in this slide. The first detection task is the attacker detection task. The first test checks for the presence of attackers in the network. Pretty simple there. The second detection task is the neighborhood detection task. The second test checks if an attacker is present in the neighborhood of a node. So that is the full area of where the node is. And lastly, the third detection task is the localization task. And the third test attempts to locate the malicious node in the neighborhood of the node. So first we have the network, then we have the neighborhood of a node, and then we have the more localized malicious node itself. Those are the 3 detection tasks here. Moving on, in reference to those 3 detection tasks, actually, we have the detection and localization steps here illustrated in the figure. So completion of tasks 2 and 3, and again, tasks 2 and 3 are the neighborhood detection task and the localization task. So completion of these tasks shall cut all communication to located malicious nodes. So this means that the outcome from the localized task, if that's completed successfully by all nodes, we can effectively isolate the attackers and prevent any future harm in the network. And this is illustrated in this figure 2 here, pulled from the paper. So each normal node H, you see these nodes H's here, will perform detection and localization independently, therefore isolating attacker A, the node A is the malicious node, from the network. So if they isolate the attacker here, then that is an effective detection and localizing the attacker. Detection schemes rely on finding statistical anomalies through statistics computed at the normal nodes. So the normal nodes are the H nodes here, and the anomalies or the abnormal nodes or attackers, all start with the letter A, are the A's in this figure 2 here. At this point, after the detection and localization steps, the paper goes into 2 different mitigations or just deeper detections of malicious nodes. The first one that the paper goes over is temporal difference detection. So temporal difference detection detects anomalies caused by the malicious agent evaluation, the average temporal difference of values held by the normal nodes. So an example here in this, this figure, this criterion piece of code here, expected initial value of malicious agent differs from the normal agent, and you can see the criterion there. When t to infinity, the network will be misled by malicious nodes. In other words, this implies that the quantity will be close to or will be large, otherwise indicating an anomaly. So in the paper, Gens et al., they recommend over to the right in this slide here, for the above risk, that is going to be the neighborhood criterion that is recommended for temporal difference detection, and the criterion below is going to be the localization criterion for temporal difference detection. So this is more, the temporal difference detection speaks a little bit more to time difference, and the spatial difference detection will speak a little bit more about spatial difference in the next slide. Spatial difference detection focuses a little bit more on spatial difference than time-related difference for detecting gossip algorithms and injection attacks. So the main idea is to exploit the fact that a malicious node, if it exists at all, always tries to influence and steers the nodes away from their true average, so making space there. If there is no malicious node in the network, the average state of all nodes are identical. So it's a little bit more reliable when you can see a consistency with the space, the spatial identities here. So for example, mathematically, there's a piece of code there. In other words, anomalies can be found in the spatial difference of states. So compared to the temporal method, spatial method registers an anomaly even if attacks are not staged directly in the neighborhood of the node. So they can detect a much more precise spatial difference. And the criterion for neighborhood detection is to the right here. That is what the paper recommends. And for local detection, it's below there. The paper recommends 2 different pieces of code there. And next we have a performance analysis for the temporal method of detection. The paper goes over this analysis here, and I've pulled a couple of graphs from the paper here. So in figure 6 here, we present the receiver operating characteristic, or the ROC, curves for the temporal difference method. First, we consider the performance of the neighborhood detection task in figure 6. As we only focus on the case when the evaluating node is located to the attacker, the ROC curves also correspond to the attacker detection task. The false alarm and detection probabilities are evaluated by taking an average of the probabilities of all 4 neighbors of the attacker. So from the figure, we notice that the detection performance improves as K increases, and this seems to provide a reliable detection. So and that's mostly for neighborhood. So for the localization for the localization task in figure 6, we assume that the neighborhood detection test was completed without errors by an oracle. Similar to the attacker detection, the performance of localization tasks improves with K. Moreover, with the same K, the performance of the detection task is worse than that of the localization task. So this basically is saying that there are some false alarms here with detecting these attacks within the temporal method. However, it can also be reliable when detecting attacks within neighborhood, but on a more localized level. The temporal method renders many false alarms. The performance analysis for the spatial method, the figures shown here, we show that the ROC curves for the localization and neighborhood detection tasks. Specifically in the neighborhood detection task, we evaluate the false alarm detection probabilities conditioned here when the attacker is actually present in the network. We can get the neighborhood detection to work. However, it is the worst performing test for the spatial difference method. However, for the localization task in figure 9, similar to the temporal case, We assume that the neighborhood detection test was completed without errors. Also, in this case, the tests improve with K in a way that is more pronounced than with the temporal different method, and under the same K, the performance of the neighborhood detection task is worse than that of the localization task. So nevertheless, the spatial method has a drastic advantage over the temporal method in spotting attacks because it leverages information of the entire dynamic, while the temporal method only uses the initial and terminal states. So it seems that the spatial method for detecting attacks is a little bit more reliable than the temporal method here. And this is corroborated here in the paper based on these tests and analyses. In conclusion here, we have proposed two independent novel strategies to detect and localize malicious nodes in a randomized consensus algorithm. Each strategy can be performed at each individual node in a completely decentralized manner and without any communication overhead. The performance bounds of the algorithm are analyzed and the simulation results confirmed the findings of this paper. In the analysis section, Gens et al. Found that the temporal method does not detect all the time the starting time of the attacks, but it provides a reasonable low amount of false alarm. However, the spatial method is very accurate overall within this testing of injection attacks in gossip algorithms. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation. I hope you enjoyed, and I have been Carrie Hodge for CYBR7100 Fall 2021. I hope that you have a great rest of your day or evening, afternoon, whenever you are listening, viewing. Thank you so much.